The wind carved through Redemption Gulch like a blade through bone, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain that would never come. Sheriff Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the settlement, his weathered hands resting on the worn leather of his gun belt, watching the horizon swallow the last amber traces of daylight. The town behind him settled into its evening rhythm, the low murmur of voices from the saloon, the creak of rocking chairs on porches, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. But tonight, something felt different. The air held a weight that pressed against his chest like a stone, and he found himself thinking of Sarah again, of the cradle that had stood empty in their cabin for 3 years now, gathering dust like his dreams. The sheriff's boots clicked against the wooden planks of the boardwalk as he made his evening rounds, his shadow stretching long and thin behind him. At 42, Marcus had the look of a man who had seen too much and said too little about it. His face bore the lines of countless desert suns and sleepless nights, etched deep around eyes that had witnessed both the cruelty and rare mercy of frontier life. The tin star on his vest caught the lamplight as he passed beneath the flickering street lanterns, each one a small beacon against the encroaching darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. He paused at the church steps, as he did every night, though he hadn't set foot inside since the day they buried Sarah's stillborn child. The white-painted wood had begun to peel, revealing the raw timber beneath like scars on weathered skin. Pastor Williams had stopped asking him to come inside months ago, understanding that some griefs were too deep for sermons and too raw for the comfort of shared prayer. Marcus touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement of the sacred space, a gesture that had become as much ritual as respect, and continued on his path. The cry came from the direction of the old Miller place, a sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. But the wind didn't sob. The wind didn't call out in the thin, desperate voice of need. Marcus felt his heart catch in his throat as he turned toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. The Miller homestead had been abandoned for 6 months now, ever since the fever took old William and his wife within days of each other. The townspeople avoided it, claiming it was cursed, but Marcus knew better. Some places just held too much sorrow to be comfortable for the living. As he approached the sagging porch, the cry came again, clearer now and unmistakably human. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, his breath coming shallow as he climbed the creaking steps. The front door hung open, moving gently in the evening breeze, and from within came the sound that had haunted his dreams for years, the sound of babies crying. His hand trembled as he pushed the door wider, stepping into the musty darkness of the abandoned home. There in the center of the main room sat a wicker basket lined with what looked like pieces of a torn dress. Inside, 2 infants lay side by side, their small faces red with exhaustion and hunger, their tiny fists waving in the air like desperate prayers. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle as he knelt beside the basket, his calloused hands hovering over the children as if they were made of spun glass. One was slightly larger than the other, but both bore the unmistakable features of newborns, the soft curve of their skulls, the delicate shells of their ears, the way their eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom and innocence of the world. Tucked beneath the smaller child was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges and stained with what might have been tears. Marcus lifted it with shaking fingers, unfolding it carefully as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The handwriting was a woman's, flowing but hurried, and the words seemed to burn themselves into his vision as he read, "Sheriff Cole, I know about Sarah. I know about the child you lost. These babies are mine, but I cannot care for them. Their father was a good man, but he's gone now and I'm dying. Please, I beg you, give them the love I cannot. They are twins born just 3 days ago. The boy is Thomas, the girl is Sarah. I named her for your wife, hoping it might ease the ache in your hearts. In the bottom of the basket, you'll find their father's watch and a letter explaining everything. Please don't think less of me. I love them enough to let them go. Elizabeth Hartwell." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him, the words blurring through the tears that had gathered in his eyes. Elizabeth Hartwell. He knew that name, knew the story that went with it. She had been the schoolteacher before the consumption took hold, a gentle woman who had loved books and children with equal fervor. He had heard whispers that she had left town suddenly, but he had never pried. Privacy was sacred in a place like Redemption Gulch, where everyone carried secrets like stones in their pockets. The babies had grown quiet, perhaps sensing his presence, and Marcus found himself studying their faces in the dim light that filtered through the broken windows. The boy, Thomas, had dark hair that caught the light like polished wood, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep brown of rich earth. The girl, Sarah, was smaller, more delicate, with wisps of auburn hair that reminded him so strongly of his wife that his chest tightened with recognition. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were the color of morning sky, clear and bright with unnamed possibilities. With trembling hands, Marcus reached into the basket and found the items Elizabeth had mentioned. The watch was silver, heavy in his palm, with an inscription that read, "To James, with all my love, E.H." The letter was longer, written in the same careful script, and as he read it, the full weight of the story settled on his shoulders like a yoke. James Hartwell had been Elizabeth's husband, a traveling preacher who had died in a stage accident 3 months ago. Elizabeth, already weakened by her illness, had given birth alone in a cabin 20 miles from town, surviving just long enough to make the journey to Redemption Gulch and leave her children where she knew they would be found by someone who might understand the particular ache of empty arms. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of providence and responsibility settling around him like a heavy coat. He thought of Sarah, his Sarah, and the way she had held his hand the night they lost their child, her fingers cold and her voice barely a whisper as she told him that perhaps God had other plans for them. He thought of the empty cradle in their cabin, the baby clothes that still lay folded in the cedar chest, waiting for a miracle that had never come. And now, here in this abandoned house, with the wind sighing through the gaps in the walls and the shadows growing longer, that miracle lay before him in the form of two helpless infants who needed love more than they needed blood ties. The boy stirred, making soft sounds that were not quite cries, and Marcus found himself reaching out to touch the child's cheek with one finger. The skin was soft as silk, warm with life and promise, and Thomas turned his head toward the touch, his mouth opening in the instinctive search for nourishment. The simple gesture broke something open in Marcus's chest, a dam of grief and longing that had been held in check for too long. He lifted the boy carefully, marveling at how light he was, how perfectly he fit in the crook of his arm. The girl, Sarah, seemed to sense the movement of her brother and began to fuss, her small voice rising in a protest that spoke of hunger and fear and the deep need for comfort. Marcus gathered her up as well, holding both children against his chest, feeling their warmth seep through his shirt and into his bones. For a moment, he simply stood there in the growing darkness, swaying slightly as he had seen mothers do, letting the weight and warmth of the children anchor him to something beyond his own pain. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the eaves and rattling the loose boards of the old house. Marcus knew he needed to get the children to safety, to warmth and food and proper care. But first, he needed to process the magnitude of what had just happened, the way his world had shifted in the space of a heartbeat. He thought of Elizabeth Hartwell, dying alone somewhere in the wilderness, her last act one of desperate love and impossible hope. He thought of James Hartwell, the preacher who would never see his children grow, never know the shape of their laughter or the color of their dreams. As he carefully placed the children back in their basket, preparing to carry them home, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had lived in his chest for so long. These children were not his by blood, but they were his by choice. By the grace of a dying woman's faith and the mysterious workings of a providence he had stopped believing in. He lifted the basket, surprised by how light it felt, how right it felt in his hands, and stepped out into the night. The walk back to town seemed to take forever and no time at all. Marcus found himself moving slowly, carefully, as if he carried the most precious cargo in the world. The children had settled into sleep, their breathing soft and regular, and he paused every few steps to check on them, to make sure they were still warm, still breathing, still real. The stars had come out, scattered across the sky like scattered diamonds, and Marcus found himself remembering the night he had first kissed Sarah under a sky just like this one, the way she had tasted like honey and promises and all the dreams he had dared to dream. As he reached the main street of town, Marcus saw lights in the windows of the houses, families gathering for evening meals and bedtime stories. He thought of all the children tucked safely in their beds, of all the mothers and fathers who took for granted the simple miracle of holding their own child. Soon he would be one of them. Soon he would have bedtime stories to tell, and small hands to hold, and the sweet weight of sleeping children to carry up to their beds. The sheriff's office stood at the corner of Main and Oak, a simple building with a jail cell in the back and living quarters above. Marcus had lived there alone since Sarah's death, finding comfort in the sparse surroundings and the steady rhythm of his work. But tonight, as he climbed the stairs to his rooms, he was already planning changes. The children would need a proper nursery, cribs and blankets, and all the things that babies required. He would need to find a wet nurse, someone to help with the feeding until they were old enough for other food. Most importantly, he would need to tell Sarah about the miracle that had found its way to their door. Marcus set the basket down gently on his kitchen table and lit the oil lamp, filling the room with warm, golden light. The children stirred at the brightness, but did not wake, and he found himself studying their faces again, memorizing every detail. They were perfect, whole, healthy, despite their difficult beginning. The boy's hair was already showing signs of curl, and the girl had the longest eyelashes he had ever seen. They were beautiful, these children who had been given to him by a woman who had loved them enough to let them go. He thought of Elizabeth's words, the way she had signed her letter with such simple dignity, asking him not to think less of her. How could he think less of a woman who had made such a sacrifice? How could he judge someone who had given everything she had to give? Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his vest pocket, next to his heart. Someday, when the children were old enough, he would tell them about their mother, about the woman who had loved them so much that she had found a way to give them life, even in the face of death. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made him turn, and he saw Sarah standing in the doorway, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with concern. She had heard him come in, had sensed somehow that something was different. Marcus felt his heart catch as he saw her gaze fall on the basket, saw the way her face went pale and then flushed with an emotion he couldn't name. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What? Who are they?" Marcus found himself unable to speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was about to tell her. Instead, he simply handed her Elizabeth's letter, watching as she read it with growing wonder and disbelief. He saw the tears gather in her eyes, saw her hand tremble as she set the letter down and approached the basket. "Twins," she breathed, and the word was like a prayer, like a benediction. "Oh, Marcus, they're so small, so perfect." She reached out tentatively, as if afraid they might disappear, and touched the girl's cheek with one finger. The baby stirred, turning toward the touch, and Sarah made a sound that was half sob, half laughter. Marcus moved to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, and together they looked down at the children who had been given to them by a dying woman's love. "She named the girl Sarah," Marcus said softly. "She named her for you." Sarah's tears fell freely now, and she leaned back against him, her body shaking with the force of her emotion. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other as they had on the night they lost their own child. But this time the grief was mixed with something else, something that felt like hope reborn. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless days, of learning to care for two infants who seemed to take turns crying and sleeping and demanding attention. Marcus had never imagined how much work babies could be, how they could consume every waking moment, and most of the sleeping ones too. But he had also never imagined how much joy they could bring, how the simple act of holding a sleeping child could erase the weariness from his bones and fill him with a peace he had thought was lost forever. Sarah blossomed under the care of the children, her grief transformed into fierce protectiveness and boundless love. She seemed to know instinctively what they needed, when they were hungry or tired or simply in need of comfort. Marcus watched her with wonder, seeing in her the mother she had always been meant to be, the woman who had been hiding beneath the weight of loss and disappointment. Thomas grew quickly, his dark eyes bright with intelligence and mischief. He was the first to smile, the first to laugh, the first to reach for the toys that hung above his crib. Sarah, the girl, was quieter, more contemplative. But when she did smile, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen, understood, cherished. The town accepted the children without question, understanding that sometimes families were made not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the mysterious workings of providence. Pastor Williams baptized them on a Sunday morning in spring, with the whole congregation gathered to witness the ceremony. Marcus held Thomas while Sarah held the girl, and when the water touched their foreheads, Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a sense of completion he had never expected to feel. As the years passed, Marcus found himself thinking often of Elizabeth Hartwell, the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life. He had searched for her grave, wanting to pay his respects, but had never found it. Perhaps she had died somewhere in the wilderness, her body claimed by the vast emptiness of the frontier. Perhaps she had found peace in her final moments, knowing that her children were safe and loved. Marcus hoped so. He hoped that somewhere, in whatever realm she now inhabited, she could see her children growing strong and happy, could know that her sacrifice had not been in vain. The children grew as children do, filling the house with laughter and tears and the thousand small dramas of childhood. Thomas became a skilled rider, fearless and strong, with his father's sense of justice and his mother's gentle heart. Sarah, the girl, loved books and learning, spending hours in the schoolhouse library, her mind hungry for knowledge and stories. They were different, these twins, as different as night and day, but they were bound together by something deeper than blood, something that spoke of shared beginnings and common love. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the house was still, Marcus would sometimes take out Elizabeth's letter and read it again, remembering the night that had changed everything. He would think of the woman who had loved her children enough to let them go, and he would whisper a prayer of gratitude into the darkness, knowing that somewhere in the vast mystery of existence, she was listening, she was watching, she was at peace. The wind still carved through Redemption Gulch like a blade through bone, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. But now when Marcus stood at the edge of the settlement watching the horizon, he was no longer alone. Now he had Sarah beside him, and the children playing in the dust at their feet, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gifts come, wrapped in the darkest grief, waiting to be unwrapped by hands brave enough to hold them. The empty cradle in their cabin had long since been replaced by two small beds, and the baby clothes in the cedar chest had been worn and outgrown and replaced with new ones. The cycle of love and growth continuing as it always had, as it always would. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the sky, and Marcus felt the first drops of rain on his face. After all these years, the rain had finally come to Redemption Gulch, washing the dust from the streets and bringing new life to the parched earth. He gathered his family close, feeling the weight of their bodies against his, and led them home through the falling rain, knowing that sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as the simplest gifts, and that love, once given freely, has the power to transform even the most broken of hearts into something whole and beautiful and true. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.